initiated. So the process was initiated. The process of decentralization was initiated by restoring the legislative power to the Bombay Madras presidencies. It thus reversed the centralizing tendency that started from the Regulating Act of 1773 and reached its climax under the Charter Act of 1833. This policy of legislative devolution it resulted in the grant of almost complete internal autonomy to the provinces in 1937. Now, third point is that it also provided for the establishment of new legislative councils. So, new legislative council was established for the Bengal, for northwestern provinces, and for Punjab also, and which were established in 1862, 1886, and 1897 respectively. The fourth one is that it empowered the viceroy to make rules and orders for the more convenient transaction of business in the council. So it was the responsibility of the viceroy to make the rules and to make the orders so that there is a convenient transaction of business in the council. It also gave a recognition to the portfolio system, which was introduced by Lord Canning in 1859. Under this, a member of the Viceroy Council was made in charge of one or more department of the government and was authorized to issue final orders on behalf of the council on matters of his department. Fifth point is that it also empowered the viceroy. Viceroy to issue ordinances without the concurrence of the legislative council during an emergency. Okay. The life of such an ordinance was 6 months. Now next is Indian Council Act. of 1892. The features of this act were as follows. It increased the number of additional non-official members in the central and provincial legislative council. So it increased the number of additional, that is non-official members in the central and provincial legislative councils, but it also maintained the official majority in them. Second is that it also increased the function of legislative councils and gave them the power of discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executive. So now we can say here that legislative council was made more powerful. It provided for the nomination of some non-official members. So it also provided for the nomination of some non-official members of the central legislative council by the viceroy on the recommendation of the provincial legislative councils and the Bengal Chamber of Commerce, and that of the provincial legislative councils by the governors on the recommendation of the district boards, municipalities, universities, trade associations, zamindar and chambers. The act made a limited and indirect provisions for the use of election in filling up some of the non-official seats both in the central and also in the provincial legislative councils. So the word election was however not used in the act. The process was described as nomination made on the recommendation of certain bodies. Now the next act is Indian Council Act of 1909. This act is also known as Morley-Minto reforms, or Lord Morley was the then Secretary of State for India. and Lord Minto was then Viceroy of India. So the features of this act were that it considerably increased the size of the Legislative Council. The size of the Legislative Council was increased, both the central and provincials. Number of members in the Central Legislative Council was raised from 16 to 60, and the number of members in the Provincial Legislative Council was also not uniform. It retained official majority in the Central Legislative Councils, but it also allowed the Provincial Legislative Council to have non-official majority. Okay, it enlarged the deliberative functions of the legislative councils, at both the levels. For example, members were allowed to ask supplementary questions. They were also asked to move resolutions on the budgets and so on. It provided for the first time for the association of Indians with the Executive Council of the Viceroy and Governor. So Indians were also associated. Satyendra Prasad Sinha, he became the first Indian to join the Viceroy Executive Council. He was appointed as the law member. Okay, it introduced a system of communal representation for Muslims by accepting the concept of separate electorate. So separate electorate means that communal representation was introduced here. Under this, Muslim members, they were to be elected only by Muslim voters, not by Hindu voters. Thus, the act legalized communalism, and Lord Minto came to be known as father of communal electorate. So this was a very, very wrong act. It also provided for the separate representation of presidency corporations, chambers of commerce, and universities and zamindars. Next act is Government of India Act of 1919. It was introduced in year 1917. On 20th August. British government declared for the first time that its objective was the gradual introduction and responsible government in India. So Government of India Act of 1919 was thus enacted, which came into force in 1921. This act is also known as Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, or Montagu was the Secretary of State for India and Lord Chelmsford was the Viceroy of India. Features of the act are as follows. It relaxed the central control over the provinces. It relaxed the central control over the provinces by demarcating and by separating the central and provincial subjects. Central and provincial legislatures were authorized to make laws on their respective list of subjects. However, the structure of government continued to be centralized in India. Okay, and next is that it further divided the provincial subjects into two parts, transferred and reserved. Transferred subjects were to be administered by the governor with the aid of ministers responsible to the Legislative Council, and the reserved subjects, on the other hand, they were to be administered by the governor and his Executive Council without being responsible to the Legislative Council. This dual scheme of governance was known as diarchy. This is a term which is derived from the Greek word diarchy, which means double rule or dual rule. However, this experiment was largely unsuccessful. Third one is that it introduced for the first time bicameralism and direct elections in the country. Indian Legislative Council was replaced by a bicameral legislature consisting of an upper house, that is Council of State, and a lower house, that is Legislative Assembly. Majority of members of both the houses were chosen by direct elections. it required the three of the six members, there were total six members, but the three members of the Viceroy Executive Council, other than the Commander-in-Chief, were to be Indian. Okay, that three members were to be Indians. It extended the principle of communal representation by providing separate electorates for six Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians, and Europeans. It granted franchise to a limited number of people, on the basis of property, tax, or education. It created a new office of the High Commissioner for India in London. And transferred to him some of the functions performed by the Secretary of State for India. It provided for the establishment of Public Service Commission, hence a Central Public Service Commission. It was set up in 1926 for recruiting civil servants. It separated for the first time provincial budgets from the central budgets and also authorized the provincial legislatures to enact their budgets. It provided for the appointment of statutory commission, so that there can be an inquiry into and reports on its working after 10 years of coming into force. Simon Commission. In 1927, 2 years before the schedule, the British government announced the appointment of 7 members statutory commission under the chairmanship of Sir John Simon to report on the condition of India under its new constitution. All the members of the commission were British, and hence all the parties boycotted this commission. The commission submitted its report in 1930 and recommended that the abolition of diarchy, extension of responsible government in the provinces, establishment of a federation of British India and princely states, continuation of communal electorate, and so on. To consider the proposal of the commission, the British government convened 3 roundtable conferences of the representatives of the British government, British India, and the Indian princely states. On the basis of these discussions, a white paper on constitutional reforms was prepared and submitted for the preparations and submitted for the consideration of the Joint Select Committee of the British Parliament. The recommendation of the 6th committee were incorporated in the next Government of India Act 1935. Alright, thank you so much for watching. I request you to please like, subscribe and share the video. Thank you so much.